Handling jealousy appropriately. When we experience jealousy in our lives and encounter these feelings in others, we should deal with these emotions in appropriate ways. Here's Gene.
Emotions and jealousy go together. Jealousy is an emotion, just like anger, just like fear. And so consequently, God is dealing with that. Now, He deals with a specific kind of jealousy. And there's no question what He's talking about when we go to Numbers chapter 5, verses 29 through 31. God says, through Moses, this is the law regarding jealousy when a wife goes astray and defiles herself while under her husband's authority. Incidentally, that was not a new problem in Israel. That was a problem that they encountered. This came out of their pagan background. And so consequently, here are laws governing jealousy, particularly as it relates to a patriarchal situation. And I think we need to keep in mind that in this Old Testament situation, it was very patriarchal in terms of how life was lived as far as families are concerned. It was a male-dominated culture. And God has not yet revealed to them the whole concept that we understand of oneness in Jesus Christ. And so He's dealing with a very serious problem here. So He says, through Moses, God says, this is the law regarding jealousy when a wife goes astray, defiles herself while under her husband's authority, or when a feeling of jealousy comes over a husband and he becomes jealous of his wife, he is to have the woman stand before the Lord. Now keep in mind, there were no laws governing jealousy. They did not have written codes as far as God's will was concerned. And so in facing these situations, God revealed a miraculous way of doing this, to deal with each of these situations. And that's what He's dealing with here. He says He is to have the woman stand before the Lord, and the priest will apply this entire ritual to her. God revealed a ritual to get at the truth, because this is something that involved getting at the truth. The husband will be free of guilt, but that woman will bear the consequences of her guilt once, indeed, the truth is found out. Now, obviously, He's dealing here with adultery. He's dealing here with immorality. He's dealing with a very specific situation. He's dealing with an age-old problem. And in dealing with this, God is moving in, dealing with this, as I said, a very specific problem that they were encountering, just like the law of restitution. See, God got very specific about the situations that they would face. And little by little, God unveiled truth on how to handle these situations. Proverbs speaks to this as well. And you see the intensity of this, and again, it's dealing with the husband. For jealousy enrages a husband. This is a reality. Jealousy enrages a husband, and he will show no mercy when it takes revenge. Now, that proverb is not condoning revenge. What this proverb is saying is this is going to be a problem in your culture, a problem in your society. And he goes on to say he will not be appeased by anything or be persuaded by lavish gifts. Don't try to buy him off. Don't try to cool him down. He is going to act with viciousness because anger has taken control of his life. Now you see at this point, God is not dealing with the rightness or the wrongness of what's happening there. What He's saying is, if you don't deal with this issue in an appropriate way, it's going to lead to some devastating results in these relationships. So God gets very practical about that. Jealousy, of course, has been an age-old problem. And when Jesus Christ came, the church was born, the problem was not resolved. And we see Paul addressing that issue, and he wrote to the Corinthians. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 3, we have another word that is used here, but it refers to jealousy. Brothers, sisters, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people. Paul's talking about his ministry among these people who were converted out of paganism there in the Greek and Roman culture because of the gospel that came to the city of Corinth. And he says, when I was with you, even once you professed Christ, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh. You're believers, yes, but as people of the flesh, as babies in Christ. And he goes on to say, I fed you milk, not solid food, because you are not yet able to receive it. In fact, you are still not able because you are still fleshly. For since there is, and here's the word, envy, jealousy, and strife, and that's what jealousy leads to, among you, there's envy, there's strife among you. Are you not fleshly and living like ordinary people? And there, when Paul uses the word ordinary people, he's referring to the fact that they're just like unbelievers. And he's simply saying, if it weren't for the gifts that God has given you and your profession of faith, I wouldn't even know that you're believers. So they were still acting in carnal ways. And one of those emotions that they were experiencing and acting on was this whole concept of jealousy. Now you see, God's beginning to unfold how to deal with these issues when he gets to the New Testament. He begins to deal with these issues at the root through the coming of Jesus Christ, on how to handle emotions that can lead to serious problems in our lives. Now let me back up a moment, because we can't understand the concept of jealousy unless we understand that we're made in the image of God. In fact, you can't understand the emotion of anger unless you understand we're made in the image of God. You see, God is a jealous God, and we're made in his image. So that shouldn't surprise us that we have feelings of jealousy. God is a God of anger. And it shouldn't surprise us, because we're made in the image of God, we're going to experience anger. Those emotions per se are not wrong emotions, and we need to understand that. The problem is that these emotions can get out of control. We can act on these emotions in inappropriate ways. In fact, let me share with you a very interesting dynamic through the study of child psychology. And this, first time I saw this, I was really fascinated. Because you see, if you take a child and you watch that child grow and develop, there's going to come a point in that child's life when they can show affection. You remember that happening to this child? Where they get to a certain age and they can really show affection. They can't show affection until there's a certain biological development in the brain as the child grows, and part of that dynamic is ability to just show affection and to reach out in affection. You know, to lay their head on your shoulder, or, you know, you can just feel that. They're showing affection. Well, if you study the biological development that leads to the ability to show affection, you will see that's a time when they're also able to get jealous and to show jealousy. The whole concept of affection developing in a child, and then the ability at the same time to be jealous, appear in almost an identical time frame. Isn't that interesting? Which means that these are God-created emotions. Now the problem is, you see, as a child grows, as we grow into adulthood, as we mature, is what are we going to do with these feelings? Well, Paul addressed the issue with anger in Ephesians when he said, be angry, but don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. God didn't condemn anger, because if you don't recognize the feelings of anger and deal with those things, if you repress those feelings and don't handle them properly, that's not healthy. That's going to lead to depression. It's going to lead to passive-aggressive behavior. And so one of the things we need to do with children even is to help them to learn to express these feelings in proper ways, so that as we grow older, we'll express these feelings in proper ways. Now, the same is true of jealousy. Jealousy is a normal emotion. And one of the things we need to do with children is help them work through this and handle these feelings in appropriate ways, rather than inappropriate ways. Let's go to the reflection response question. Why are the feelings of affection and jealousy twin emotions, which I've, in a sense, explained? We're made in the image of God. But more practically, how can we keep them, that is, these feelings of affection and jealousy, from becoming sinful? And when sin does occur, how do we handle the situation biblically? What are the steps that we should take? Well, let me just share a few practical thoughts on the answer to that question of what practical steps we should take. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, if we're mature enough to understand this as a growing person. I'm not talking here just about children who have these feelings. I'm talking about those of us who are adults. We should know the differentiations here. And that is the question, are our feelings of jealousy just simply based in our carnality, our immaturity, our sinful behavior, like the Corinthians? Their envy, their jealousy was based on sin. They were just plain carnal and sinful, and they were jealous. And there is an aspect of jealousy towards other people. It's just plain sinful and immature. And we need to look at that. And that's a question we need to ask ourselves. On the other hand, these may be just some normal feelings. And they may be based in reality. And that's another question we need to ask ourselves. Are our feelings of jealousy based in reality? And if these feelings are based in reality, there's a certain element of justification. But there we have to be very, very careful. Because there's a very fine line between how we handle the situation. The same can be true of anger. There may be justification for our anger. But there may be no justification for continuing to allow that anger to lead us to do things that hurt people. And so we have to ask ourselves the same questions. And we need to get in touch with reality. And if these feelings are based on reality, then we need to deal with that reality. And one of the ways in which we can deal with that reality is to have an objective listener, somebody who can help us to discern the basis of our feelings and what is right and what is wrong, what is normal and what's going to happen if we don't deal with it properly here, and with suggestions on how to handle it properly. In most instances, it takes some good communication. And we need wisdom, because there are all kinds of variety of situations that I could cite that are justification for jealousy and anger in life. And we need to deal with these issues in proper ways and learning how to communicate and handle those situations. Now, there's another thing we need to recognize, which is even more subtle. And that is to recognize these feelings as a reality, even though they're not based in reality. Let me say that again. Feelings of jealousy are a reality to us. And just to simply say you shouldn't feel that way is not dealing with the issue. That is a reality to us, even though we may not be justified in having these feelings. As we look at it, we're responding in an inappropriate way. And so we need to be able to differentiate between what is reality in reality and what is a reality just to us. But it's not a reality in relationship to this total circumstances. And by the way, that's a very important principle, I think, that applies to other emotions as well, not just to jealousy.